This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Alarms and Discursions by G. K. Chesterton. Chapters 4 through 6. Chapter 4. The Telegraph Poles. My friend and I were walking in one of those wastes of pine wood which make inland seas of solitude in every part of Western Europe, which have the true terror of the desert, since they are uniform, and so one may lose their way in them. Stiff, straight, and similar stood up all around us the pines of the wood, like the pikes of a silent mutiny. There is a truth in talking of the varieties of nature, but I think that nature often shows her chief strangeness in her sameness. There is a weird rhythm in this very repetition. It is as if the earth were resolved to repeat a single shape until the shape shall turn terrible. Have you ever tried the experiment of saying some plain word, such as dog, 30 times? By the 30th time it has become a word like snark or pobble. It does not become tame, it becomes wild by repetition. In the end a dog walks about as startling and undecipherable as a leviathan or a croquemitaine. It may be that this explains the repetitions in nature. It may be for this reason that there are so many million leaves and pebbles. Perhaps they are not repeated so that they may grow familiar. Perhaps they are repeated only in the hope that they may at last grow unfamiliar. Perhaps a man is not startled at the first cat he sees, but jumps into the air with surprise at the 79th cat. Perhaps he has to pass through thousands of pine trees before he finds the one that is really a pine tree. However this may be, there is something singularly thrilling, even something urgent and intolerant, about the endless forest repetitions. There is the hint of something like madness in that musical monotony of the pines. I said something like this to my friend, and he answered with sardonic truth, "Ah, you wait till we come to a telegraph post." My friend was right, as he occasionally is in our discussions, especially upon points of fact. We had crossed the pine forest by one of its paths, which happened to follow the wires of the provincial telegraphy, and though the poles occurred at long intervals, they made a difference when they came. The instant we came to the straight pole we could see that the pines were not really straight. It was like 100 straight lines drawn with schoolboy pencils, all brought to judgment suddenly by one straight line drawn with a ruler. All the amateur lines seemed to reel to right and left. A moment before I could have sworn they stood as straight as lances. Now I could see them curved and waver everywhere, like scimitars and yataghans. Compared with the telegraph post, the pines were crooked and alive. That lonely vertical rod at once deformed and enfranchised the forest. It tangled it all together, and yet made it free, like any grotesque undergrowth of oak or holly. "Yes," said my gloomy friend, answering my thoughts, "you don't know what a wicked, shameful thing straightness is, if you think these trees are straight. You never will know till your precious intellectual civilization builds a 40-mile forest of telegraph poles." We had started walking from our temporary home later in the day than we had intended, and the long afternoon was already lengthening itself out into a yellow evening, when we came out of the forest on to the hills above a strange town or village, of which the lights had already begun to glitter in the darkening valley. The change had already happened which is the test and definition of evening. I mean that while the sky seemed still as bright, the earth was growing blacker against it, especially at the edges, the hills and the pine tops. This brought out yet more clearly the owlish secrecy of pine woods, and my friend cast a regretful glance at them as he came out under the sky. Then he turned to the view in front, and, as it happened, one of the telegraph poles stood up in front of him in the last sunlight. It was no longer crossed and softened by the more delicate lines of pine wood. It stood up ugly, arbitrary, and angular as any crude figure in geometry. My friend stopped, pointing his stick at it, and all his anarchic philosophy rushed to his lips. "Demon," he said to me briefly, "hold your work. That palace of proud trees behind us is what the world was before you civilized men, Christians or Democrats or the rest, came to make it dull with your dreary rules of morals and equality. In the silent fight of the forest, tree fights speechless against tree, branch against branch, and the upshot of that dumb battle is inequality and beauty. Now lift up your eyes and look at equality and ugliness. See how regularly the white buttons are arranged on that black stick, and defend your dogmas if you dare." "Is that telegraph post so much a symbol of democracy?" I asked. "I fancy that while 3 men have made the telegraph to get dividends, about 1,000 men have preserved the forest to cut wood. But if the telegraph pole is hideous, as I admit, it is not due to doctrine, but rather to commercial anarchy. If anyone had a doctrine about a telegraph pole, it might be carved in ivory and decked with gold. Modern things are ugly because modern men are careless, not because they are careful." "No," answered my friend, with his eye on the end of the splendid and sprawling sunset, "there is something intrinsically deadening about the very idea of a doctrine. A straight line is always ugly; beauty is always crooked. These rigid posts at regular intervals are ugly because they are carrying across the world the real message of democracy." "At this moment," I answered, "they are probably carrying across the world the message by Bulgarian rails. They are probably the prompt communication between some 2 of the wealthiest and wickedest of His children, with whom God has ever had patience. No, these telegraph poles are ugly and detestable. They are inhuman and indecent. But their baseness lies in their privacy, not in their publicity. That black stick with white buttons is not the creation of the soul of a multitude. It is the mad creation of the souls of 2 millionaires." "At least you have to explain," answered my friend gravely, "how it is that the hard democratic doctrine and the hard telegraphic outline have appeared together. You have... But bless my soul, we must be getting home. I had no idea it was so late. Let me see. I think this is our way through the wood. Come, let us both curse the telegraph pole for entirely different reasons, and get home before it is dark." We did not get home before it was dark. For one reason or another we had underestimated the swiftness of twilight and the suddenness of night, especially in the threading of thick woods. When my friend, after the first 5 minutes' march, had fallen over a log, and I, 10 minutes after, had stuck nearly to the knees in mire, we began to have some suspicion of our direction. At last my friend said in a low, husky voice, "I'm afraid we're on the wrong path. It's pitch dark." "I thought we went the right way," I said tentatively. "Well," he said, and then, after a long pause, "I can't see any telegraph poles. I've been looking for them." "So have I," said. "They're so straight." We groped away for about 2 hours of darkness in the thick of the fringe of the trees, which seemed to dance round us in derision. Here and there, however, it was possible to trace the outline of something just too erect and rigid to be a pine tree. By these we finally felt our way home, arriving in a cold green twilight before dawn. Chapter 5 A Drama of Dolls.